Hello, everyone. We're about to get started. Just joining to make sure we're all set up here. Looks great so far. Okay, it's the top of the hour, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining today. This is our new District Activist Leader webinar series, and we are, headed into 2024, and we really want to make sure that our DALs are getting opportunities to, expand your learning and gain new skill sets. So we're really excited about today's session. And I am excited to be your moderator today. I'm Steffany Stern. I'm the Society's Vice President of Advocacy. And in my role, I work with staff and with activists all across the country from my home base in Minneapolis. I have worked for the Society for 9 years, but I've been involved with the Society throughout my life because I have a personal connection to MS. My mom lives with MS. We have a lot of exciting things we're going to be going through today. So I want to make sure to preview the agenda before we get started. So I'm going to, after we do the agenda, I will share our mission statement and our diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. And then I will be introducing our special guest, Tom Jedlowski. He will be walking through the ins and outs of engaging with the media. And then I will be engaging in an exciting conversation with Lori Turley, a DAL who has successfully worked on her own letter to the editor. And then finally, to wrap up, Tom and Lori and I are going to come together for a little Q&A. Throughout this webinar, we will invite you to submit any questions. To ask a question, you can use the Q&A feature that's at the bottom of the screen, and we'll save questions until the Q&A at the end and try to answer as many as we can. But you can also, as you can see, people are already doing it. You can interact with each other in the chat, which is always great. So let's get started. The mission statement for the National MS Society is, we will cure MS while empowering people affected by MS to live their best lives. And our diversity, equity, and inclusion statement is, the National Multiple Sclerosis Society is a movement by and for all people affected by MS. Our voices and actions reflect diversity, equity, and inclusion. We welcome and value diverse perspectives. We actively seek out and embrace differences. We want everyone to feel respected and be empowered to bring their whole selves to ensure we make the best decisions to achieve our mission. I always appreciate that we read through both of those statements at the beginning of every meeting like this, just to ground ourselves in the principles and why we're here. So I am excited. I get to introduce you all to Tom Jedlowski. I will do a shortened version of his amazing bio, but what you need to know is Tom has been with the Tennessee Disability Coalition since 2018, and he is responsible for all of the coalition's communications and brand management, including their messaging and media relations and copywriting, strategic event planning and execution, and a whole lot more. Tom is passionate about the power of systems change through collaboration. He currently serves on the Mayor's Advisory Committee for People with Disabilities in Nashville. He's a district activist leader for us in Tennessee and a member of the Public Relations Society of America. And now, welcome, Tom. I will turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tom Jedlowski, as Steffany said. I'm very excited to share what I know. And, like you, I am a MS warrior. I was diagnosed with in 2015. But in my other life, I also do public relations and media relations. So very, very excited to chit chat about what I know. The first things that I like to do when I'm kind of, thinking about and talking about PR and sharing our stories is I just like to define a couple of things so that it doesn't confuse anybody downstream. Sharing your story with the media is essentially a tactic. So tactics are specific tasks that implement a strategy, and a strategy is sort of organizing and orchestrating your tactics, and all of that is ultimately to help reach a goal. So, for example, in our world of MS, we may be advocating or sharing our story about access to our DMTs. So it would be really important to say or to tell that story at the right time, which would be a way of orchestrating that tactic to reach that goal. And we might want to time it when we know it's going for a vote, or there's something else that's happening that's topical. It'd be important to have a media spotlight on that. And so, therefore, if someone sees that story, they may think twice about voting in favor of it. Next slide. I have a specific slide about this because I think it's that important. Another way to think of this is it's not what you say, it's what people hear. Unlike an advertisement, you can't just like write a check and say, write this, put this in your publication. You need to make sure that there's some messaging and a wow factor and a newsworthiness to what you're talking about. And there's just a lot of messaging that needs to happen to make the most out of that media opportunity, both to ensure that the resulting story is effective, but it also helps us get us closer to our goal. So if the tactic is met and it's in line with the strategy, then hopefully it's going to help us reach that goal. So I'm just going to briefly walk through a couple of ways you can share your story and ensure that your message is understood. Next slide. Letters to the editors and op-eds, that the term gets thrown around interchangeably, but they're actually different things. Insofar that a letter to the editor is like that proverbial soapbox. They're not well researched. It's just your chance to rant and rave, usually around 250 words. The op-ed is you with your reporter hat on. It's about 650 words, and it's well reasoned and researched. So it's factual, and it's you can back it up with sources. Next slide. For approaching these things, I always default to what I call the three R's, which is research, report, and repeat. So what are the three R's? When you're going and you're thinking about placing an op-ed or writing a letter, what do you need to know? You need to know who to contact and who to send that letter to. So who are the opinion and engagement editors? And what similarities and themes do you see in the coverage or the things that do get printed? A lot of times editorial boards or producers will kind of have a theme that they're kind of aiming for that's been something that's, they've received feedback from their readers about, or there's otherwise, in Nashville, we had a shooting at a school last year, unfortunately. And so public safety was a really top of mind issue. So, how can we augment our stories to be more in line with whatever we're seeing in the existing coverage? So maybe if it was public safety, you could say the safety of my family's livelihood is contingent on my ability to access my DMEs. So basically just know your audience and speak to that audience. Next slide. Report. So don't make the editor's job harder. Make your points clear, make them fact-checked and accurate. And then, like I said, supply resources to back up what you say, usually just with an embedded link, or you could use an annotated footnote if you want to. Usually an embedded link will be fine, because in the online edition, they'll just run that link as well. You want to make sure you have proper grammar and punctuation. Unless your overall point is in some way humorous, don't try to be cute or funny, or assume that the audience knows you well or knows that you're joking. In my mind, I always try to imagine what Walter Cronkite would think of my pitch when I reach out to media. And for those who are maybe too old to remember Mr. Cronkite, he was a very, fact-based, very, objective journalist in every single way, and is often considered the gold standard. So, just keep it to the facts, keep it straight, but don't try to be fancy either. There's no need for $5 words. I like to say if Cronkite didn't use $5 words, then there's no reason that I need to. Instead, pretend that you're writing a letter to a friend. But maybe that friend they're important to you, but it's something that's important to you, but your friend doesn't know everything about this issue. So just assume your friend doesn't know what you're talking about, and then try to explain it through more of that lens. And then just, again, be mindful of that word count: 250 for a letter to the editor, 650 for an op-ed, because I know it's not much, but it's If you don't come in under that word count, the editor may make those decisions for you and cut your piece back. And you don't want that, because then you're losing a little bit of control over what you're trying to say. So if it's best that they may punt it back to you and say, hey, shorten this up, do it. Because don't let them do it, because then you're losing control over that message. And they may make choices you might not agree with. And, the last thing is really repeat. It's very common that you will send your letter along and you won't hear anything. And, that's not that your letter was bad or there's anything wrong with it. It's that newsrooms, if you've never been in one, are inundated with phone calls, emails, faxes, telegram messages. There's everyone's trying to contact the newsroom, but businesses, organizations, communities, schools, everybody's trying to get the attention of that newsroom. So, while we think what we have to say is important, it's probably not the most important thing the editor is working on at that moment. So if it is time sensitive, like coming back to the DMT example, you can say that in your email. Say, hey, op-ed attached, this issue is coming before Congress on this date. We'd really like to, make sure that we get this out before then. Editors don't have to abide by that, but they really try to and try to be mindful of that. So, and then if you don't hear anything, don't feel bad to follow up. Wait a few days though, give that editor a little time to breathe. And then just say, hey, just wanted to see where we're at, or if you had any questions. And then if it does run, make sure you send a thank you note. And I can't really emphasize this enough, insofar that being a reporter these days can be a very thankless job. They're getting all sorts of feedback from the community. Most of it's bad, because people, just as with any other product, we're more likely to complain than we are to compliment when something goes well. So when we do get a chance to compliment and thank, I think that it's really important to do that, so that we, as a society, the MS Society, are creating that positive brand experience when we interact with an activist or a district activist leader. So in this example, I like to bring it up because it really is an example of a piece that I did for the Tennessee Disability Coalition in 22. The story broke the day before the general election. Before we push play on this, I just wanted to really quickly talk about that I met with the advocate you're about to see. Her name is Hannah. She has rheumatoid arthritis and myasthenia gravis. And she was speaking to what we call our disability scorecard that goes out and has a bunch of different areas for consideration for the state of Tennessee as far as a lived experience of people with disabilities. And so we asked Hannah to kind of put a finer point on it, to bring that reality to life. And so we talked through with some messaging as far as the things we wanted to make sure made it into the story, because you're going to talk to that reporter for, anywhere from 5 to 45 minutes sometimes. And the average soundbite is going to be about 4 seconds to 7.5 at max. So we want to make the best of those things. So we'll go ahead and play the piece, and then I'll circle up after.
Right now, a new report shows Tennessee is failing adults with disabilities.
Well, the Tennessee Disability Coalition gives a D grade to the state's policies to support people with disabilities. Fox 17 News' Jackie Del Pilar joining us live downtown. Now, Jackie, advocates hope that this report will be some sort of wake-up call for lawmakers.
Megan, that's right. They do hope this is a wake-up call, because they tell me, unfortunately, it's not a surprise to them that Tennessee is failing on multiple fronts when it comes to helping adults with disabilities. But they hope this can be a springboard that leads to change. Life for Hannah and David Lee looks a little different than most couples. Hannah has chronic health issues like rheumatoid arthritis and myasthenia gravis, which leads to extreme muscle weakness.
So it affects my respiratory muscles, my breathing muscles, my limbs. I get really weak and have to use my wheelchair more often.
Hannah relies on her husband, David, for transportation and as a caregiver.
I have benefited from home health services, but they're so bombarded that we ended up getting discharged, and David was trained as basically a nurse because they didn't have enough staff to meet the needs that they had.
The couple isn't surprised to hear a new report finds Tennessee is failing people with disabilities. The state received an F grade in access to affordable housing, medical debt, and availability of home health care workers. It's also failing on caregivers, with AARP ranking Tennessee as 49th in the nation for supporting family caregivers. I reached out to House Speaker Cameron Sexton and to Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally asking what's being done to improve the lives of Tennesseans with disabilities, and I'm waiting to hear back.
We'd hope that this would be the impetus to taking a look at some of these policies and saying, this doesn't work. We need to reimagine how we can serve people with disabilities.
Hannah hopes this report can lead to change for people like her.
Life for us is truly a gift, and we chose to live that gift here in Tennessee, and now it's kind of like we're having to pay the price for that choice.
The Disability Coalition plans to revisit this report annually.
So the big themes that Hannah and I talked about before she did the interview were there was about what I call thinking points, as opposed to talking points where people try to kind of memorize things and they get jumbled. I said, these are 3 points that you're going to use your own story to make. This report reflects my experience, or I'm otherwise not surprised by the low score. I said, if you're pressed, just say, seems generous, honestly. Surprised it's not an F. She said something to that effect in there. And then, life is a gift, and we chose to live it in Tennessee, but now we feel like we're paying the price for that choice. And that verbatim made the story. And then there's kind of a little bit of Jeff, a little bit of Jackie, the reporter, was that we're earnestly releasing this to work with the legislature to try and improve this grade. And so those are the sort of 3 thinking points that, I kind of versed Jeff and Hannah about before the interview, and they did great jobs of communicating that message. And you can repeat those themes as you're talking to a reporter. There's nothing wrong with that. And we'll go through some tips in the next slide, but just kind of wanted to show you how, they had an interview, a sit-down interview in a park, and it was at least 45 minutes. And now you can see how many seconds actually made it into the story. So how do we find opportunities? I think, Steph, are you doing this one or am I doing this one? Apologies.
I'm here. Hello. Okay. I'll pop up just really quickly and then I'll give the floor back to Tom. So on this slide, there are just some more ideas for finding opportunities with TV or radio that are more based on what we do at the society or have done. So the first idea on the slide is if it's an awareness related activity or a fundraising event is happening, you could share it with media contacts, TV or radio, and encourage them to cover it. That is a great opportunity to build relationships with members of the media. This would be something you would work on with your advocacy contact at the society. And then if it was something related to, say, Walk MS or Bike MS, they would also work along with the society event staff. The second idea on here is, let's say that there's a reporter that has an interest in your issue and has been covering your topic a lot, or you follow them on Twitter or X or whatever that's called now. You see them talking about it. You can reach out to them to let them know that you have a story or an angle on the topic. Again, you would talk to the advocacy staff first, just to get prepared on how to approach it. And then the third idea here is, or the third thing to be aware of is, if you're a person who has shared your story with the state advocacy staff or LB, Laura Bennett, or in some other way, and you let us know, you would be willing to amplify your voice, we could potentially connect you with a reporter if they reach out and say they're looking for an interview on somebody impacted by the issue, which I assume is what happened, Tom, in your previous example. The station reached out to you and said, hey, do you have somebody who can talk to us about this and bring this to life? And then you prep them and work with them. And it's just like the perfect pairing. So again, these are just ideas, but wanted to share in case they, spark interest. And on this side, you can see a great example of TV outreach and what it has achieved. This is our very own Sam Villela. Sam's mom and her sister both live with MS. They're in Ohio. She reached out to her local news station about an MS awareness raising event about a decade ago. And now every March they reach out to her to make sure they're covering MS Awareness Month in Ohio. And that relationship has allowed Sam to also share other info beyond MS awareness around her advocacy work that she does as a district activist leader. She's gone to a public policy conference. She's talked about her sister's story with copay accumulators and a lot more. So anyway, those are just the two examples of what we've seen here. And I will stop talking and let Tom take the floor again.
Thanks, Steffany. Real quick, I just feel like if there's anything, from the advocacy standpoint, that's, the one thing that you take away is, you do not have to answer questions that you are not asked. I think sometimes people feel that they need to say a lot more. Answer the questions that you're asked, but if you don't know the answer to a question, you're fine to say that. You're not a policy expert and no one expects you to be. For the purposes of MS advocacy, you're just simply sharing your story. And who's a better expert in your own life and your own experience than you are? So that's really the component of the activist here, is really to just share their story. Us schmucks behind the scenes are doing the policy stuff, and so don't worry about that. And also, I think it's important in this kind of COVID world that if you're not comfortable doing an in-person interview, you have every right to say that. Just say, hey, look, I'm on a DMT and I'm not comfortable with that. Or you can set the terms of your interview. So and another kind of good tip is, if you're in any sort of litigation with the courts, this is something I talk about with my advocates too, say with like a school district or your employer or an insurance company, anything that you say in that interview that runs contrary to something that you may have like given a disposition or any sort of formal statement about can be used. So not that you shouldn't do those things, but as long as it's not directly related to the case, it's probably fine. But just, it's important to know that, because, you're not getting compensated for doing the media. You don't need to derail at something else that's going on in your life. So anyway, like I said, you're going to talk to them between 5 and 45 minutes, and you just want to make the most of those moments that make the story. And if you want to write down what you want to say first, that is totally fine too. Just say, look, I have some things that I want to make sure that I tell you. And, so I've written them down, and just to make sure that I do. Totally fine. And then this is my last tip that I give to everybody immediately before you start speaking. You've sat down, reporters across from you, lights kick on. They're about, a few seconds from getting started. Take 3 deep breaths before a word comes out of your mouth. And I say that because you physiologically will be less anxious. And when that happens, then you're going to give a better interview if you feel confident and capable. So just those three deep, steady breaths, absolutely fine. It'll slow down your speaking and you'll just do a better job. All right, next slide.
And now you're kind of turning it over to me, and I was just backstage in this webinar, taking my deep breaths before I came back on, because that is a really good tip, and I need to slow down because I talk too fast. So, thank you so much to Tom. That was all really helpful information for all of us to know, and it made me want to go write my own letter to the editor. I haven't written one in a while. But yes, just again on this slide, we're underscoring the society is here to help MS activists who want to engage with the media. And if you're ready to get started, or if you have questions or you want to talk through them with someone here at the society, you're more than welcome to start by reaching out to your local advocacy staff member. And if you don't know who that is, we'll have a slide at the very end with the address, but you can email msactivists@nmss.org. So again, we'll put that up at the end. So, but thank you so much, Tom. That was a wonderful presentation. We really appreciated it.
Happy to do it.
And now I'm going to transition us to our case study of an MS activist who has tried and succeeded with media advocacy. I'm introducing our next guest, who is MS activist Lori Turley. Lori is one of our DALs hailing from the state of Texas. She is a retired educator who holds a doctorate degree in educational leadership. She was diagnosed after her MS diagnosis in 2021, and she was forced to retire and end her 21-year career in public education. And since then, she has pivoted, and Lori has gotten very involved in fundraising and advocacy with the National MS Society. We're so lucky to have her. She serves on the Texas Government Relations Advisory Committee. She's a district activist leader. She's gone to Washington, D.C. and Austin to do advocacy with us. And her goal is to do everything she possibly can to raise awareness and help find a cure for MS within her lifetime. And she is a proud wife and mom of 2 boys who are 15 and 12 and lives in Rockwall, Texas. And her letter to the editor detailing her diagnosis and her plea to lower drug costs was published in the Dallas Morning News. And I'm going to read that just momentarily. But I see Lori has come up from backstage, which is great. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Steffany.
Hello. So you're a district activist leader, like I said, and you've had this experience reaching out to the media to give background for people who don't know what happened before you did the letter. This is when Congress was looking at doing legislation to address prescription drug access and affordability, what became the Inflation Reduction Act. And you wrote that letter to the editor to the Dallas Morning News. And it was to your senators around the Inflation Reduction Act. And I would love to read it for everyone because it's so powerful. And then it gives you a sense of what a letter to the editor sounds like. And we're also going to send the link. I think Corbin might put it in the chat as well. But it's called High Price of Feeling Better. February 2021 was the worst month of my life. Over the course of 5 days, I progressed from double vision to losing spatial reasoning while driving and to walking into walls at work. I went to the emergency room at UT Southwestern Medical Center, where a kind doctor with a white coat and cowboy boots patted my knee and said, "Hun, I think you have MS." After 3 days, I was discharged with a cane and a pencil eraser-sized lesion in my brain. Since that time, I have battled to regain my health, attending driving school, cognitive therapy, and physical therapy twice a week. The drug I take is designed to prevent future attacks. When it was approved by the Federal Drug Administration in 2017, the cost for twice yearly infusions was $65,000. My bill last year for 2 IV bags of this medicine was over $300,000. I am fortunate because I have decent insurance, but I can't help thinking about the people who aren't as fortunate as I am. Something must be done to lower prescription drug prices in this country. I serve as a volunteer with the National MS Society to try to advocate for lower drug costs. We need constituents to contact Senators Ted Cruz and John Cornyn and urge them to act now regarding this issue. Sincerely, Lori Turley of Rockwall. I should have had you read that through as I was reading. I was thinking we should have had Lori read.
No, I'm glad you read it. Thank you.
So now I'll stop talking and we're going to have our conversation. And I'll start by asking, I'd love for you to tell us what motivated you to contact the media and share your story.
Sure. So the reason I decided to do it is at the time, like you explained, we were trying to work on the Inflation Reduction Act. And so I received an email from the society, and it was basically a call to action for the DALs. And one of the options or bullets that was listed was to write a letter to the editor. So I sort of, now that I'm retired and don't work anymore, I sort of view being a DAL as, a job. So I jumped right on it just to try to do whatever it is that you guys need us to do. And that day, I'll never forget, I was having a really bad MS day, and I couldn't get out of bed. So I thought, well, at least while I'm lying here, I can be productive.
Well, thank you so much. We're so glad that you did it. And respond to that call to action. I want to know a little bit more about what did the process of submitting the letter look like for you? Did it take a long time? What was the process like?
I mean, as far as writing it, I found it to be a really easy process. I just kind of thought back to my English classes in college and, what do I need to do first? Okay, I'm going to write an attention grabbing opening sentence, which was true, which was February 21 was the worst month of my life. And then I just tried to use this descriptive language, but not overly flowery, but just descriptive language to describe what happened to me that day, my own unique story. So I wrote it out and I made sure I was under the word count limit. And then I just Googled my numbers just to make sure that all of that was accurate. as far as how much the drug cost when it came out versus what my bill said. And then I just went to the Dallas Morning News website. It was really easy. I wrote it in my notes app on my phone as I was lying in bed and just copied and pasted it into their link. I think it took maybe 10 minutes. So even if writing isn't your strong suit, I know that there are MS Society staff who will gladly help anyone with proofreading or any questions that you have. But the point is that you're the owner of your unique story, and there's really no right or wrong way to do it.
Absolutely. I'm glad to hear that it was not a difficult thing to do. I don't think I've ever submitted one on my own. I'm really impressed that you went through that process. And my last question is, did you get any feedback afterwards? And I guess it's two questions. Did you get feedback on it? And do you have other advice for other activists?
I remember shortly after it was published, a lot of friends called me or messaged me to say that they saw it. I didn't even know that it had been published. So that's how I found out. But what was so great about it is people were telling me, it was such a great thing, congratulations. But then the follow-up question was, what can I do for you on your behalf? And so it kind of had a greater impact than what I even realized. So people actually, a lot of my friends and some, friends of friends, emailed, wrote senators. Really, it was a call to action. So it really did have a greater impact than what I realized. And on a personal note, that day I didn't have control over my body. I couldn't get up. I couldn't get out of bed, but sort of writing the letter to the editor gave me a sense of control back that day. And it just allowed me to add my story and my perspective to the conversation. So, my advice to everybody would just be to go for it. Like I said before, your story is unique. And the more of us that can get the word out and urge people to act, the closer we can get to a cure and faster.
I love that because I think it's so powerful how your letter to the editor, it amplified your voice, all those other people joining in with you asking, what can I do? So it's a great example of, it's basically how media advocacy can be a tool to advance our agenda. So that was amazing. Thank you so much, Lori, for sharing your personal, experience with this and making it sound, I think it was great. It sounded very rewarding, but also accessible, which is what we want. So, and now I see LB is up and Corbin, looks like they have questions for us. And I just want to point out, Lori, you have a lot of hearts and clapping hand reactions coming in. So I love to see that.
That's sweet. Thank you.
Alrighty. So of our panelists, including Steffany and Corbin, feel free to jump in and help answer some of these questions. Our first one is going to go to Tom, and it comes from Angela. In writing, in her experience, she's used to writing for academia, and she's wondering if you have any suggestions on how to adapt that style of writing to a more broader audience.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, it's really, I know from, my own writing experience that when you're fully versed in writing one way, it can be kind of tough to switch gears and go to another. I kind of alluded to a little bit in the presentation, but, steer clear of $5 words and just imagine that you're telling this story to a friend, and at least as your sort of intellectual North Star. So if it seems, overcomplicated or overly nuanced, just try to keep it as straightforward and to the point as you can, and hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Tom. Next up, we have a couple questions on this, wondering, generally speaking, how do you know when to write an op-ed versus a letter to the editor? And when submitting that, are you supposed to state that explicitly, or does the editor or the newspaper you're submitting that to make that determination based off of content and word count? How do you know?
It depends. I mean, I would say your sort of proverbial letter to the editor is usually in a response to a piece that's already ran or appeared. So, this letter is in response to X, story that appeared on this date. And, if it's around 250 words and it's just your opinion, it's really a letter to the editor. You don't have to outright, define it. You can. But the editorial staff's going to find the spot for it and where it really lands. But as Whereas an op-ed, especially if you're trying to inject like a new narrative or, just an alternative point of view, remiss of not, anything else, then that's typically going to be the longer form op-ed.
Great points. Steffany, heading to you with the next question, and it's about our advocacy staff and how they can help. So again, from Angela, she's wondering if she has an advocacy issue that she's thinking about or something that perhaps she would hope her elected officials address. How can the MS Society help with that, and who should they be in touch with?
Yes, this is a great question. So your local advocacy staff partner can be a really good partner in this process in whatever way makes sense for you and feels right. And if you don't know who that person is, we're going to put a slide up with an address you can email, and we will make that connection. But I will say, again, it's personal for what type of support you need. So sometimes when somebody reaches out and says, I want to write a letter to the editor, I'm real fired up. They're like Lori and want to write it themselves. And like the act of writing is part of what they want to do. And they take it from basically beginning to end and, touch base with us, but we're kind of hands off. Other times someone says, I want to write a letter to the editor and I'm not really sure that I want to do all the writing. I would feel more comfortable if I had help. In that case, usually we do something like ask a series of questions, take a lot of notes, try to figure out all the key points about their story or the points that they want to make and who do they want to address it to. Like in Lori's example, she's aimed it at her two senators in the United States Senate because they were key decision makers in this. So we help, figure all that out. And then we could even just write the draft. And then we would send it to you to make sure that it sounds like your voice. You would have editing, approval, all that, and help it become the finished product. But again, making sure that it's your own story, your own perspective that is being sent. But that's something that we can do, and then we can even help get it submitted. Lori just made it sound easy. Again, I always rely on somebody like a Tom to put it in the portal or whatever, but we can definitely do that. Am I missing anything else, Tom, that I should say that we do?
There's a portal?
Or like however you get the letter to the editor in the internet to submit it.
Yeah. Yeah, I usually just email the editor directly, but it just depends on the paper. Some papers have different, like formats. They'll have like a portal or some sort of website where they want you to upload it. Others are more open to just having it emailed directly to them. It just depends.
Yeah. So I would say we can help in like a huge range of ways. It just depends on what you need. And we're happy to do that.
We are.
The one, this actually happened to me the other day. This is why I wanted to mention it. I was asked to shop an op-ed around from a partner of the agency, and between us and the 115 people on this call, it was really boring. It was real boring, and so I said, I was like, this person is welcome to submit it themselves, but I'm not submitting it, and so long story short, if it wouldn't pique your interest to read it, chances are it's not going to pique anybody else's. So really be mindful of that, of the things that pique your attention, when you're browsing, or doom scrolling or however you consume your news. What are the things that make you stop that thumb? That's that's a playbook page that you might want to adapt for yourself. And I mean, it was a disability related op-ed and everything, and I was like, this is not relevant to me. So it's not relevant to anyone else because you're not communicating it in terms that are relevant to me. Of course it's relevant, right? And it's newsworthy on its face for the fact that for the topic that it was. But in the sea of competition for that same space in that paper, the one that's got the more eye-catching or intriguing perspective is usually what's going to make the paper or make the cut.
Thank you, Tom. And then last up, Tom, this one is for you as well. We're seeing a lot of traction around thinking points versus talking points, and interest in having you break that down a little bit more.
I'm intrigued to know where you're hearing traction about thinking points because I literally came up with that term myself. But the industry standard is talking points. So here's the points that we would like you to communicate during your interview, right? It's usually, a pretty, what I call pithy prose. It's really quick and kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's got attitude, a little sass, a little meat on the bone that the media really likes to, it makes for a good soundbite. I think it's important to communicate those, but in the world of our advocacy and in disability advocacy as a part of my day job, I don't think it's the best way to approach it. I think people tell their own stories in their own words. And so what I give them are what I call thinking points. Use your own story to make that point. And so I'll give them, 3 points, like care is insufficient in the state, or, whatever those 3 points are. Then use your own story to tell those points. And usually I'll try to come up with an acronym or some easy way to remember the 3 points that I want them to make. And it really takes a lot of pressure off the interview, because that way somebody's not trying to perfectly memorize some phrase, because even if they do, as soon as the cameras start rolling, I guarantee you will forget it. It happens every day. But if you just have if you have again, that North Star of where you're going, then your own story will fill in and get you there.
Thank you, Tom. Last question is going to be going to Lori, and this comes from Maureen. She says, great job sharing your story and experience, and she wants to know what work since then has looked like with your senators, and if you received any response from them kind of tied to your op-ed work.
Well, as you know, the Inflation Reduction Act passed, so that was a huge win. Can't say that Texas was a huge contributor to that, but it's hard to get things done in Texas, Since then, I've lobbied in DC and Austin, and just mainly what I'm trying to do now is just make sure that they know who I am, and just keep developing that relationship in a respectful yet kind of pushy way. I don't know if that's the right term to use, but my whole goal, like even just spending the hour on this call, has always been, what's the finish line here, and that's a cure. And so whatever I can do to make that happen is what I'm going to keep doing.
Thank you, Lori. And I'll turn it to Steffany, I believe, or Corbin for next steps. And one last question that I'll comment on is, we got a question about whether you should submit or send us letters to the editor or op-eds that you submit and they get placed. And the answer is yes, please. Always let your advocacy staff know if you get something placed. We would love to celebrate that with you. Steffany?
Yes, so true. And I like Lori's experience. Sometimes you don't know, sometimes somebody else tells you that it was placed. It's like, it's a strange process sometimes, but so yes, thank you. I'm wrapping us up. Thank you so incredibly much to Lori and to Tom for sharing your time today and your input and your expertise. Again, if you're ready to start writing, if you want to dive in but you don't know where to start, feel free to reach out to us, to your advocacy staff partner. We will talk it through, and we love to talk to people about what this opportunity could look like. So many thanks to all of you for attending today. If you have questions, you see here's your address to reach out to our general address. We can get you pointed in the right direction. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you all for being MS activists, and we'll see you soon on another webinar or other awesome opportunity. Thanks, everybody.